The snow fell like white feathers from the sky, soft but never-ending. Jace tightened his coat around his neck as the cold wind slipped through the cracks of the old cargo sled. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the freezing air that had somehow crawled into the engine bay. He was the only human trader foolish enough to cross the Turgan 5 mountain pass in winter. But he needed to make the delivery. The medicine in the back was for sick children in a distant outpost. The engine growled, then coughed, then made a clicking sound he didn't like at all. He hit the dashboard gently. "Come on, girl, not now," he whispered, but the sled jerked suddenly. Lights blinked out and the power died. Silence took over, followed by the deep groan of metal cooling in the cold. Jace leaned back in his seat and let out a long breath. "Great, just great," he muttered. He grabbed his comlink, hoping for a signal. Nothing, just static and a blinking red light. No signal, no heat, and no way to call for help. He opened the door and was greeted by a slap of cold wind that stung his face. Snow was already piling up around the wheels, half burying the cargo sled. He knew the blizzard would only get worse. With nightfall, Jace went back inside, pulled out 2 thermal blankets, and wrapped himself up. The temperature inside was dropping fast, but he had no choice. He had to wait and hope for rescue. Hours passed slowly. The only sound was the wind screaming outside. The fuel was frozen, the power cells dead, and the emergency flares were used last week on another trip. He was alone now, wrapped in silence and snow. His eyes were closing when he heard something, a sound, faint at first, like nails on metal. Then again tap tap tapped on the side door. Jace sat up straight, heart pounding. He reached for his tool wrench, the closest thing he had to a weapon. He moved to the door slowly, unsure what to expect. Maybe a wild animal, maybe something worse. When he opened the door, the wind pushed in hard, blinding him for a second. Then he saw her. A figure covered in snow and ice, crouched low like an animal. She had fur on her, arms, long claws, and ears like a wolf. Her eyes were glowing a soft blue, but they looked dull, like she hadn't slept in days. She opened her mouth and spoke with a strange accent. "You need help?" Then she collapsed face first into the snow. Jace didn't think. He just moved. He picked her up quickly, surprised by how light she was. Her fur was wet, her hands ice cold, and her breathing shallow. He brought her inside, closed the door, and turned on the emergency heat packs. He wrapped her in the last blanket and rubbed her arms to warm her up. She didn't wake up, just shivered and whispered something in a language he didn't understand. Jace stayed next to her, watching her breathe, making sure she didn't stop. This wasn't how he expected his delivery trip to go, not at all. The snow kept falling outside, heavy and loud. The sled creaked under the weight of it, but inside, a strange calm settled between the human and the unconscious alien girl. Jace didn't know who she was, why she had come, or what kind of creature she truly was, but she had knocked to help him, and now she needed him more than ever. He leaned against the wall and whispered, "You helped me, now I help you." He didn't know that this moment, this small act would change both their lives forever. And that outside, something was watching them from the snow-covered trees. Waiting, Cash's body was weak, but her mind was alert. She woke to warmth, soft blankets, and a strange smell, machine oil and human sweat. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light inside the broken cargo sled. The human was sitting nearby, watching her with tired eyes. He looked rough, cold, bitten cheeks, cracked lips, but there was kindness in his gaze. He didn't speak right away, just handed her a hot drink packet and said, "Drink this." Slowly, she stared at him for a moment, confused, then took the packet and drank. Warmth spread through her chest, and she let out a quiet breath. "I'm Jace," the human said. "Trader, delivery runner, or I was until this sled died." She lowered her head a little, then finally spoke. Kasha. Her voice was raspy, and her throat ached, but her name still came through clearly. I saw your trail, she added. I followed your oil scent. Jace raised an eyebrow. Surprised by her sharp nose, she explained that she had escaped from handlers 3 days ago. Running through the cold forests, she hadn't eaten in 2 days and hadn't slept in longer. When she smelled burning oil in the air, she had followed. Hoping for help or, at least shelter, Jace asked carefully. Handlers. She didn't answer that one, just turned her head toward the wall and closed her eyes. Silence settled between them for a while, broken only by the wind outside. Jace checked the engine again, hoping it might magically start, but no, it was dead. For good, the sled was out of power, out of signal, and far from any help. He told Kasha they were stuck 20 kilometers from the next town, and walking was almost impossible in this weather. She sat up slowly, then looked him in the eyes, and said something he didn't expect. I can pull the sled. Jace blinked, not sure if he heard her right. Wait, what? I'm strong, she said again. I've done it before. Jace looked at her slim arms, her clawed fingers, and her lean but shivering body. She didn't look strong enough to walk far, let alone pull a half-ton sled. But her eyes told a different story. There was a fire in them. Something unbreakable. Before he could argue, she stood, pulled the main harness from the wall, and wrapped it around her waist. Her movements were shaky, but steady, like someone who had done hard work their whole life. Jace tried to stop her. You're still hurt? You can't. I can, she said firmly. We move before the storm gets worse. He didn't want to admit it. But she was right, another storm front was coming, and staying here might kill them both. Jace helped. Tie the sled ropes around her arms, double-checked the knots, and loaded the cargo more evenly. He still felt bad. This wasn't her job. She was already half frozen, but she gave a small nod, crouched down on all fours, and growled softly as she leaned forward. Then she pulled, slowly at first, then with more force. The sled groaned and creaked. The snow resisted, but it moved. Jace couldn't believe it. She was actually pulling the whole sled. One step at a time, like a beast of burden, but proud. Not broken. He walked beside her, ready to catch her if she stumbled. But she didn't stumble, not even once. The snow was thick, the air thin, and the wind kept cutting across their faces. But Kasha kept pulling, her claws digging into the snow, her breath heavy and steady. Jace looked at her and realized something strange. She wasn't doing this for a reward, or out of fear. She was doing it because she chose to. Because she wanted to help. Because for the first time, maybe someone had shown her kindness, and she was giving it back in the only way she knew how, through strength. Through effort, through loyalty. The blizzard howled louder, and the path ahead was still long, but Jace looked forward, then back at Kasha, and whispered under his breath, "You're not just strong," he said. "You're something else entirely." And deep in the snowstorm, the two figures, one human, one alien, moved forward together, not as master and servant, not as stranger and runaway, but as something closer than both, something still unknown, but real. The cold had a voice of its own now. It whispered through the trees, screamed across the hills, and bit every inch of exposed skin. Jace had wrapped a scarf around his face, but the wind still found a way in. Beside him, Kasha moved like a ghost. Through the snow, strong, silent, and focused. She didn't complain, didn't pause unless he asked her to. She just kept pulling the sled as if her legs were made of steel and her heart of fire. Hours passed, though it felt like days. They hadn't spoken much, but every step forward said more than words could. Jace noticed how her ears twitched at distant sounds, how her nose lifted when the wind changed. She was always alert, always watching for danger, not just for herself, but for him too. Once she stopped suddenly and growled low. Jace froze and asked, "What is it?" She didn't answer, just stared into the forest. Something was out there, but it passed without showing itself. They moved on, but the silence after that felt heavier. Kasha began to limp slightly on one side. Jace saw it, said nothing at first. But his eyes couldn't hide the worry. She looked back, caught his glance, and gave a short nod, as if saying, "I'm fine." But the blood in the snow told a different story. Her paw pads were cut, raw from ice and sharp rocks. Jace stopped the sled, grabbed some cloth from his bag, and moved to her side. She bared her teeth at first, not in anger, but in habit, protecting herself. But when he gently touched her foot and wrapped it, she said nothing. He wasn't just a human to her now. He was someone who didn't treat her like a thing. That silence, that moment, it built something between them, something strange and new. The snow thickened again, and the sky turned darker. They had maybe 5 more kilometers to go, but it felt impossible. The wind pushed against them like a wall. Jace had to walk behind the sled now, using it as a shield. Kasha's back arched, her arms stretched, and her breath came in heavy bursts. He could hear her whispering to herself in her own language maybe. Old words, maybe prayers. Suddenly, a howl rose in the distance, not the wind this time. It was sharp, angry, and far too familiar to Kasha. She stopped mid-step, ears pointing straight up. Body frozen, Jace moved beside her, heart pounding. What was that? She looked at him with something he hadn't seen before. Fear. "Hunters," she said. Barely above a whisper, Jace looked behind them but saw nothing yet. Still, they both knew something was following. They started moving faster, but not recklessly. Kasha's steps became urgent, and Jace pushed the back of the sled to help. The trail curved along a ridge with steep drops on one side and thick trees on the other. Not a good place to fight, not a good place to run. Then they heard it again, closer this time. Jace reached for the emergency flare in his coat. He only had one left, a single shot. And he wasn't even sure it would fire in this cold. They kept moving, but Jace's hand stayed on the flare. The shadows between the trees shifted. He saw a glimpse, 4 legs, red eyes, too fast for a clear view. Kasha growled low in her throat, and her fur stood on end. Then, from the woods, a figure stepped out, tall and wrapped in thick black leather. It wasn't just a hunter. It was her owner, the one who marked her. She froze, but Jace stepped forward and raised the flare. "Back off," he shouted. "She's not yours." The figure laughed, a cruel, ugly sound that echoed in the cold air. "You don't own her either, human," the voice sneered. "She's born to serve, like all her kind." Kasha didn't wait, didn't ask, didn't cry. She lunged, dragging the sled forward and charging straight at the hunter. The man didn't expect it. He fell back, tripping in the snow. Jace fired the flare into the sky, and the light burst open like fire above them. The flare scared the hunter's beast, which ran, howling, into the woods. The man cursed and limped back into the shadows. Disappearing, Kasha stood there, panting, her shoulders rising and falling fast. Jace walked up slowly and touched her arm. "You didn't run," he said. "You charged." She looked at him and whispered, "I don't run anymore." The night had no mercy. Darkness covered everything. Not just the sky, but their thoughts too. Even the snow seemed quieter now, heavier, as if it knew what had happened. Kasha hadn't spoken since the flare burned out in the sky. She walked ahead, still pulling the sled, her steps stiff, her shoulders tight. Jace followed behind, his heart still racing from what they had just faced. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words felt right, and Kasha didn't ask for comfort. She only kept going. A tree snapped somewhere behind them. Jace turned quickly, but nothing was there. He was starting to feel like the forest had eyes, watching, testing, waiting. Kasha didn't look back. Her ears stayed up, listening, she said softly. He'll come again, maybe not alone. Jace clenched his fists, angry and helpless. Then we fight together. She shook her head once. You're not strong enough, not for them, but I have a reason, he said. And that's stronger than claws. Kasha looked at him. And something in her eyes changed just for a second. They kept moving until the slope ahead turned rough. The ground cracked under each step, and the sled wheels sank deeper. Kasha tried to pull harder, but her breath was growing shorter. The cold wasn't the only enemy. Now exhaustion was beginning to win. Jace ran forward, took the ropes, and pulled beside her. He didn't care that his legs ached or that his skin burned from the wind. He only cared that she wouldn't have to carry everything alone anymore. Then, from above, snow fell, but not from the sky. An avalanche. No too small, too fast. Something dropped down from the trees, a shape covered in silver fur. Landing with a snarl, another one leaped down from the other side. Kasha pulled Jace back fast, throwing her body in front of his. 2 Lorani hunters now stood between them and the path forward. This time, they didn't speak. They only drew out long whip blades from their belts and spread out. Kasha growled so deep it made the ground shake. Jace had never heard anything like it, not even from animals back on Earth. She stepped forward slowly, her claws out, her stance. Lo, one of the hunters laughed. You were always a fighter, he said. But you forgot your place. Jace reached for his flare gun again. But it was empty. He had nothing left, nothing but a wrench, a frozen hand, and the will to protect her. The first hunter rushed in, his blade slicing the air. Kasha ducked low and slammed into his legs, sending him tumbling into the snow. The second one lashed out, the whip catching her shoulder. It cut deep. She screamed, not in pain, but in fury. Jace ran forward and tackled the second hunter from behind. He had never fought like this, never. Even punched someone before. But now he fought with everything he had. Snow filled his mouth. Blood filled his nose. But he didn't stop. The hunter kicked him off and stood tall, raising the blade again, but Kasha was already in the air. She landed on the man's back, bit into his shoulder, and ripped the whip from his hand. The first hunter tried to run, but she threw the weapon after him, striking his leg. He fell with a cry and crawled away into the forest, dragging his body. The other followed soon after. Both defeated, both broken. The snow was stained with blood. Their blood, not hers this time. Jace lay back in the snow, breathing hard, laughing from relief and pain. Kasha knelt beside him, her fur soaked in red and ice. You okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jace nodded. "I think I broke my face." She smiled, an actual smile, one that showed her teeth but didn't scare him. It warmed something in him he didn't know was cold. He looked up at her and said, "We're not just surviving now, are we?" She answered softly. "We're becoming something new." The forest grew quieter after the fight, but not safer. The kind of silence that followed blood was heavy, like the ground itself was holding its breath. Kasha's shoulder bled slowly, her fur matted with red and snow. Jace wanted her to stop and rest, but she shook her head each time he asked. "There's no time," she whispered. "We don't know how many more are coming." She picked up the sled ropes again with trembling hands, her body swaying with every step. Jace couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the ropes and forced her to stop. "You're not alone, not anymore," he said firmly. He pulled the sled while she walked beside him, her breathing sharp and unsteady. Her strength had limits, and she had gone beyond them. Every few meters, she blinked hard like she was trying to stay awake. Jace wrapped his scarf around her arm to stop the bleeding. He kept talking. Telling her stories from Earth, none of them made much sense, but they filled the air. He talked about dogs that danced in videos, about cold soda on hot days, about how clouds sometimes looked like faces. Kasia didn't always understand, but she listened, her eyes softening as he spoke. For someone who had only known orders, commands, and cages, his nonsense was the warmest thing she'd ever heard. They reached a frozen river, wide and flat. With cracked ice stretched across it like glass, Kasia touched the surface with her foot and growled. "It's weak." Jace looked across. "The town is just on the other side." There was no bridge, no safer path. And the storm behind them was catching up fast. He turned to her. "We'll go slow, together." She gave one small nod, but her tail twitched. She was nervous. And so was he. They stepped onto the ice, 1 foot at a time. The sled sliding gently behind them, cracks formed beneath them. Like the sound of glass whispering, each step felt louder, the weight of their hope pressing down halfway across. A loud pop echoed beneath their feet. Kasia shouted, "Move!" But it was too late. The ice shattered behind them. The sled tilted back, and the rear wheel plunged into freezing water. Jace jumped forward and pulled hard on the rope, his fingers screaming from the cold. Kasia threw her full weight forward, digging her claws into the ice and dragging the sled free. But as she did, one of her legs slipped through the crack. She gasped, the shock of ice hitting skin like knives. Jace dropped to the ground, crawled to her, and grabbed her arm. "I've got you. Don't let go." She held on, her teeth clenched, eyes wide, together. They pulled her out inch by inch until she collapsed on the surface, shaking violently. They lay there, side by side, not moving for a long moment. The river groaned beneath them, warning them to keep going. Jace stood first and helped her to her feet. This time, he didn't ask, didn't argue. He carried her. Kasia growled at him weakly. "I can walk. You just almost drowned." He said, "Let me be stubborn this time." He walked the last stretch of ice with her in his arms, and the sled rolling behind them. His legs felt like stones, but he didn't stop when they finally reached the other side. The trees opened up, and in the far distance, lights blinked. Warm, golden lights. The town was real. And it wasn't far now. Jace looked at her and whispered, "We're going to make it." Kasia blinked slowly, her breath forming little clouds in the air. "You're strange human," she said softly, "but you're not weak." For the first time since the engine failed, Jace allowed himself to smile, not because they were safe yet, but because they were still together, still standing. And sometimes that was the most powerful thing in the galaxy. The town didn't look real at first. It shimmered behind the curtain of snow like a dream just out of reach. Warm lights flickered through frosted windows, and thin smoke curled from chimneys like soft signals of life. Kasia stared at it from the hill. Her body slumped against Jace's side. She had never seen a place like this, not through a window, not without chains. To her, freedom had always been a word, never a picture, but now it had shape. It had sound, it had warmth, and it was only a few steps away. Jace could feel her weight shifting more into his arms. He tightened his grip and whispered, "Almost there." Snow cracked under his boots, and the sled creaked behind him, heavy and frozen, as they reached the first house. A bell rang from a post above. A motion sensor hold Earth tech lit up. The path, the light hit Kasia's face, and her eyes winced from the sudden glow. Footsteps sounded from a nearby door, and then a voice. "Who's there?" Jace stopped, unsure of how to explain what had happened. The door opened, and an older woman stepped out. Coat wrapped tight, eyes cautious, her gaze fell on Kasia. And her expression shifted, instantly curious, then afraid. "Is she one of them?" the woman asked. "She saved my life," Jace replied without hesitation. The woman didn't answer, but others began appearing, neighbors, guards, townsfolk. faces full of questions. Voices rising with confusion. Kasia stood up on her own. Though her legs trembled, she faced them, not hiding, not bowing. Just standing tall, despite the blood and bruises. "She's bleeding," a man said. "She needs help." "No, she's dangerous," another whispered. Jace stepped in front. Of her, his voice louder now. "Listen to me. I would be dead if not for her." She pulled the sled 4 kilometers. Through ice, through hunters, through everything. "She's not dangerous. She's stronger than all of us, and she's earned a place here." Silence followed. The kind that stretched too long. Then the medic stepped forward, a woman with tired eyes and steady hands. She looked at Kasia, then at Jace, and said, "Bring her inside." No one moved at first, but no one stopped them either. Jace helped her into the small clinic. Warm air finally brushing against their frozen skin, Kasia sat down slowly, unsure how to be still in a place without fear. The medic cleaned her wounds, wrapped her shoulder, and didn't ask questions, only said, "She's lucky to have you." Jace looked at her, then back at Kasia. "No. I'm the lucky one." Outside, people watched through windows. Some with suspicion, some with awe, and a few with quiet respect. Later that evening, child came near the clinic door, holding something wrapped in cloth. He stood silently, unsure. If he should knock, Kasia saw him through the window and opened the door. The child held out the bundle. "For you." Inside was warm bread torn from a family meal. Still steaming, Kasia took it gently, eyes blinking with something she didn't fully understand. She bowed her head once, not as a slave, but as someone learning what kindness felt like. That night, Jace stayed beside her bed, still awake long. After she slept, he didn't think about cargo, or delivery, or broken engines. He thought about how a stranger in the snow had become the only reason he was alive. And how maybe, just maybe, this town would come to see her the same way. Morning came slowly, as if the sky was still unsure if they deserved light. The storm had passed, but the snow outside still whispered of the night before. Inside the clinic, the heat hummed softly. And the air no longer hurt to breathe. Kasia opened her eyes to find Jace sitting by her side, asleep in a chair. His face was peaceful, his hands still red from frostbite. But he hadn't left her alone, for the first time in her life. She had woken up without a cage, without pain, and without someone yelling her name like it was an order. She sat up, slowly. Her shoulders still sore, but wrapped clean and warm. She looked around the room, then quietly stood and walked to the window. Children were playing outside in the snow, laughing and slipping. One of them threw a snowball too far and hit a guard's leg, then ran screaming with laughter. Kasia smiled, not wide, not strong, but enough. She had never played like that. Never even seen it before without hiding behind a crate. Jace stirred behind her, rubbing his face. "You should be lying down," he said, yawning. "I've lied down enough," she replied gently. He stood and stretched. Looking out the window with her, "Do you think they'll accept you?" he asked, not out of doubt, but real concern. She thought for a moment, then answered, "Maybe not all of them, but I'm not leaving that same day." Jace met with the town council, explaining everything again. Some were unsure, some were afraid, but no one could deny the facts. She had saved a human, fought off hunters, pulled a sled across ice, and never asked for anything in return. Eventually, they agreed, not fully, not loudly, but enough. Kasia could stay under watch. For now, but with freedom to move. That was more than she'd ever been given. Weeks passed, and the town began to change in small ways. People nodded to her instead of looking away. Children waved from windows, some even brave enough to ask about her claws. She never bragged, never tried to prove herself. She simply helped mending ropes, clearing snow, hauling supplies like she always had. But this time, by choice, Jace worked beside her, building a new delivery cart with stronger wheels and a backup solar core. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. One afternoon, he found her staring at the old sled, half buried behind the repair shed. "You hate it?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I pulled you through a war on that thing." She said, "It's part of me now." Then came a knock on the Gaeta stranger in torn gear. Face pale, barely standing, his sled had broken far from the trail and his partner was trapped in the cold before anyone else could speak. Kasha stepped forward, already grabbing her harness. Jace grabbed his coat and ran after her. No hesitation, no one stopped them, not this time, as they disappeared. Into the snowy trail again, one of the guards whispered, "That alien girl. She's braver than half of us." Another added quietly, "No. She's one of us now." And so she ran, not because someone ordered her, not because she was chained or forced, but because she was needed, because she was trusted. And for someone who once believed she was born only to serve, that trust was heavier and more beautiful than anything she had ever pulled.